Welcome to the CareerJitsu podcast, where we connect the art of Jiu-Jitsu with your career. Our mission is to empower and inspire you with engaging conversations and valuable insights from people just like you who benefit from the shared relationship between your workplace and the art of Jiu-Jitsu, leading you to a more fulfilling and successful life. Welcome to the CareerJitsu podcast. Today, our listeners are in for a treat. We have Rob Magao. Rob is a highly respected individual in BJJ. He's a black belt in BJJ, and he is also an extremely knowledgeable businessman owning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools, two of them. He is going to connect his career with the art of Jiu-Jitsu. He is a BJJ Academy owner. He is a retired police officer, and he is also the founder of the nationally recognized law enforcement training program known as the Officer Survival Series. So, Rob, welcome to the podcast.
What's going on? How are you?
Yeah. So Rob, if you can jump right into sharing with our listeners a little bit about your background in jiu-jitsu and law enforcement, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So just growing up, I was super interested in martial arts. At a young age, I just was fascinated by it, and I started doing judo as a small kid after school. That program only lasted a certain amount of time because the instructor ended up passing away. But and then I was kind of in some transition. Then I ended up in a Goju-Ryu Academy, and they did some Japanese jiu-jitsu and some boxing, and that's where I met you as well. You were in a sister academy in Massachusetts that were kind of part of the same association. And then through that training, I went through the end of my high school career and going into college. And then in 1993, I saw the first Ultimate Fighting Championship, and that was like, I got to learn this. I saw Royce Gracie go out there, and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to do this, but I got to do this. It felt like it was a calling. I wanted to do it. And there was no schools in our area at that time, and I didn't really have the money to go anywhere else. So I started off just kind of like trying to learn from the old VHS tapes with Rorion Gracie and his mustache and the acid jeans and the Gracie in action tapes, and getting judo books and sitting there on some accordion mats we stuck together and trying to figure out some of these movements. And that's kind of how we started our training. And then, became a police officer in 1997, and, the rest is history. I just immediately knew that I wanted to do this and kind of for the rest of my life, fell in love with it right away. I loved all martial arts, but, jiu-jitsu was different for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny because it's amazing how things come full circle, because every time I have a chance to talk about you to any of my students and stuff, I tell them about our history, about how when we were teenagers and we were, with no gear, we were karate sparring with bare fists and no shin guards and kicking each other in places that hurt a lot.
Oh yeah. On a
And there
hard,
was a few times that we caught each other really good, right?
oh
And
yeah,
ended up in the corner curled up.
it was some,
Yeah, great. And you mentioned about the Royce Gracie thing and how you got into jujitsu. I do remember though the first UFC as well, and because we were, I think, doing karate together at that time, because that was 91. So I believe we were maybe 14, 15 years old around that time, right? Somewhere
yeah.
around
So
there.
the first UFC was, it was in November of 93.
Oh, okay, 93.
Yeah, but I had already been training. I started training in 89, I want to say, with Sensei Zamitis.
Yeah.
And then met you somewhere in that first few years before the UFC, because we definitely knew each other. And I don't know, how old are you now?
40, almost 49.
Okay, so I'm 53, so I was a little bit older, but
Okay.
just gotten out of. I was still in high school when I met them, and then I met you probably in my early college days.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's amazing. We've known each other for over 30 years. It's crazy how time
where'd the time
flies.
go, right?
I know, right? So there's two worlds that really we want to connect here with this episode. Being a BJJ black belt, you've trained in jiu-jitsu for a long time, and you also were a law enforcement officer for a long time as well. So let's connect these two worlds together for our listeners so they can kind of understand how you've created this niche in training law enforcement. Because, I think in sport, for example, sport BJJ, you have people who focus on sport BJJ and they become really good at sport BJJ, and they end up becoming, jiu-jitsu world champions. Maybe they make it to the UFC, but you really found a niche for street application, street BJJ application. And I really think that that's interesting how you honed in on that, you focused on it, created a passion for it, and it turned into what it is today. So I think it's amazing. So can you give our listeners a little bit of a understanding of how that all kind of came about?
Yeah, sure. So when I started doing jujitsu, you have to remember it was probably a much different experience than when people do it nowadays and for the first time. Back then, every class was more like a mixed martial arts class than it was a jujitsu class. What we would see as jujitsu now. Back then, we would wear our gis, but we also would hit with gloves. We would, spar on the feet. We would do wall work. We would do. It was very. Most schools would refer to as MMA training now. And when our gis got soaking wet, we just took them off, and that was no gi training now. It wasn't like a distinguish between the two. And
Right.
it was much more, I would say, combative at that time. And we had to learn all the stand up portion of it, and a wall work and takedowns and with strikes. There was. It wasn't until probably the early 2000s that the competition scene started to really kind of take off, and you started to see schools less likely to teach those elements of the art. And because true jiu-jitsu has all five elements, right? It has stand up, it has some striking. The striking's done for a different reason. It's done to close the distance, it's done to set up submissions, but there's still striking of in true jiu-jitsu. Clinch work is in true jiu-jitsu, takedowns are in true jiu-jitsu. A groundwork is in true jiu-jitsu, and a weapons-based environment does exist in old school true jiu-jitsu, right? It was a battlefield art first. And I think that some of that has been lost over the years, and I tried to maintain and preserve that as much as I could. We have competition people in our school, but I make every one of my students, and I have 500 plus students, I make them all in the very beginning learn the older style of jiu-jitsu first, and then we grow into the competition afterwards. And I think the connection for me between law enforcement and jiu-jitsu was they're both problem-solving activities, right? As a police officer, every day I go to work, I'm basically responding to everyone else's worst day of their life, right? That's what I do all day long, every day, is respond to someone's 911 call. And when I get there, I have to make decisions. I have to make decisions under stress and under pressure, and sometimes fast. Sometimes you have time to make decisions. Sometimes you don't. And you're constantly under that decision-making process. And that sounds an awful lot like grappling, like jujitsu, right? You're constantly under some stress. You're constantly under time restraints. You're constantly under decision making skills under circumstances where you're not totally in control of what's going on around you because other people have a say in what's going on. So I think that those are the kind of considerations that I thought they match very well. And quite honestly, jujitsu, the brotherhood, sisterhood, camaraderie, culture of most jiu-jitsu schools is very similar to being a cop. Like there's a lot of ball busting going on. There's a lot of like everybody gets along for the most part. You have your moments where there's some drama, but for the most part, and at least in my schools, thankfully, everyone gets along very well, and it's not much different than being on a tactical team or being in the roll call room before you go out on your shift. The personalities are very similar.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there with learning, everybody's wanting to learn because it's going to make them better on the job and better on the mats too. So building a community and culture for you in the beginning years of training law enforcement in jujitsu, can you talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that you faced in building that culture and trying to change that culture? Because I know there's a big commitment, and there was a big commitment for you. I've listened to a podcast before that you were on, and you talked about how there were some obstacles in the beginning that you really had to break through when you were a police officer. The agency you worked for was very open minded to learning and to try to get better, get their officers trained better in defensive tactics. So can you help our listeners understand a little bit about some of the obstacles that you faced in your beginning years of training law enforcement?
Yeah, sure. So
Recommend.
when I became a police officer, I was already pretty used to the culture because in high school I was an intern with the Connecticut State Police, and I had a lot of friendships built through that. I knew older, people that were cops, and I was around that culture for a while, so I kind of had an understanding of it. And then in college, I did a bunch of internships with law enforcement agencies, so I kind of understood the culture a little bit more than maybe someone coming in completely green that had never been in law enforcement. And when I got out of the academy and went back to my police department, luckily I did work for an agency that was very progressive and motivated to develop as the best training they could for their officers. And I had a chief of police, Jim Strelacci, who was a wrestler his whole life. So he understood the power of grappling, and he understood that it was relatable to our job. And he kind of let me run with it a little bit once it was figured out that I had some training. So basically, from that perspective, I had a head start because that's huge when you have an administrator that's going to stand behind you. And I was just a kid, basically, early 20s, no previous experience in law enforcement, and I end up within a year of coming out of the academy, they have me teaching 20, 30-year vets and in service that were salty. They didn't want to be there. This is stupid. I've never had to been on the ground like this in my life as a cop. Why are
Right.
we doing this? So
And you were a young cop then too, right?
I I was a young cop, I'm in, 23 years old or whatever. So they,
Okay.
yeah, but once I got them out there, once I started to show them, once I could get down on the mat and demonstrate it with them and give them something that they could feel that they would absolutely use that night, and I could kind of gain their trust. Once I was able to do that a couple of times, the floodgates opened, and then it was like, well, what else do you got in that little bag of tricks you got there? I think a big mistake that a lot of martial arts instructors make, particularly jiu-jitsu instructors, is they go to teach cops and they want to show them some fancy thing like right out of the gate, or how to defend a knife from the mount position. It's like the likelihood of that happening is so rare. And if that's where you found yourself, you probably screwed up a long time ago, long before you ended up in that position, right? There's things we could have done to prevent that from happening to begin with. They're gonna not buy into it. They're gonna say, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen to me. Why am I wasting my time with this?" But if you show them something that they can easily see themselves having to deal with because they have many times, like someone laying on their hands and they won't give you their hands, or someone gripping the steering wheel and won't come out of the car. Those are things they deal with on a routine basis, at least in my department where we were relatively busy. You know, if you show them a few tricks and then they go out that night or that week and they end up using one of them, that's when they're like, "Hey, what's this kid? This kid knows something." So that from that point forward, I was started to gain some traction, but I only gained it within my own police department. And again, there was no one in the law enforcement community training jiu-jitsu when I started. Not in my area, maybe other parts of the country, but in my area, I was literally the only person. And then I met a guy, Jimmy Codges. He was a state trooper in Connecticut, and we were kind of on similar paths. We just didn't know each other, and a mutual friend of ours connected us together. And then it was like that was a moment of we found each other kind of thing. And then we were able to piggyback off each other and use our resources together to make it bigger.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you talked about before about how your agency had a lot of different officers that had various skills. So you kind of came together and kind of collaborated your skills together to make everyone better, which is awesome. Having that opportunity. And you said, I think, about a SWAT challenge. You created a SWAT challenge, right? Can you talk a little bit about that part of it and how much that has had an influence on establishing the respect for jujitsu in law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're referring to within our department, there was kind of two areas that we were developing this. One was at my police department, at the West Hartford Police Department, where we had a small room with some mats and we had, a couple of wrestlers and a couple of boxers and a taekwondo person and a aikido person and me as a jiu-jitsu guy and some judo people. And we would just get together, 2, 3 times a week for a couple of hours and spitball things and come up with ideas. And quite frequently, 9 out of 10 times, the people that were grapplers tended to do much better than everyone else in those pressure environment where we're kind of going for each other and trying to win, right? So that kind of won it over in my own police department. But what won it over around the state with other agencies was then being able to start the SWAT challenge. And myself and a bunch of people on my team, wasn't just me. There was Jeremy Clark and Chris Chappell with the two of the other main players. And we basically had a series of unfortunate events in Connecticut where there was some tough calls and some police officers were killed. And we noticed that back then, you got to remember, this is before social media, this is before YouTube, this is before the internet, really, the iPhones. We didn't have it. We had pagers, when they needed us. It was a much different time frame. So when we would get called to a scene and there's multiple tactical teams there, none of the teams knew each other. So because it wasn't like today where everyone is friendly with each other. They literally didn't know each other and didn't know the capabilities of each team, didn't know the equipment or the tactics used by each team. and it was like we were just islands that weren't connected. So after a specific incident, we kind of all got together and we had done like a SWAT challenge among our own team, like an individual event a few years before this, and we thought it was really interesting. So we thought we could maybe do that on a bigger scale by inviting teams to compete with each other. At first, our agency was against it, but then once we brought it to their attention a few more times, we kind of won them over, and we were able to start this in 2005. And the first year, I think we had 12 or 13 teams, and then after that, it grew all the way up to 40 teams. It still runs to this day, and it's I think the second largest, if not the largest, tactical challenge in the country. And during that challenge, one of the events, we put a grappling station in. The SWAT team members during this event would have to come through, and they would always pick their toughest guy because they want to see, they want to win, and they would put their toughest guy into this scenario. And every single time, I'm bringing my jiu-jitsu students, and we're probably at this point in time equivalent to a blue belt. This is 2005, right? But we're totally controlling them. No one can come through and do anything to us, and we're controlling them. And we proved to the SWAT community pretty fast, holy crap, like this works. So that kind of grew it outside of my police department. Then other agencies started contacting us and saying, hey, can Rob come to our PD and show us some of this stuff? Can Rob come to our SWAT training and show us some of what he did in the challenge? And I started getting invited to other places to show what I knew. And then from there, I start meeting new people that were kind of on the same path as me. And we started connecting the dots, and we started forming a unit and a team of people that were passionate about it. And that's kind of how it really started to grow around the state.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that birth of establishing that respect among your community of law enforcement is great, and that kind of is what sort of funneled your interests into starting the Officer Survival Series, right? So in the beginning years, that was kind of like just what's really nice is you're a pioneer in law enforcement training. It's amazing to hear your story about how you started with just a club and just kept pushing and being consistent for change. And by doing that, you changed the whole culture of your department. And that's how kind of it started with the and how Officer Survival Series kind of got its birth, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never set out to start a martial arts school. I never set out to start a police training program. I literally just wanted to get better, and I wanted people to train with. And two people became four, four became 10, 10 became 50, and before you know it, I had a group of people. They're all like, "Well, hey, we need a place to train." Oh, and that's kind of how it grew. It was never like, "Oh, I want to start a school." I never set out to do that. And when I first became a cop and I started getting some interest in this type of training, I would put out these like 2, 3 times a year. I would put out these seminars for 3 hours, and I would say, and I would literally make a flyer with the little things at the bottom where you rip the phone number off. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Younger listeners aren't have no idea what we're talking about, but you'd make a flyer, you'd put the things at the bottom so someone could take the number off, and I would literally hand deliver them to every police department that I could drive to, and then I would give stacks of them to other officers, and then they would pass them along, and we would, put them at every agency, and we would have these classes, and I called it the Officer Survival Series because we did a series of these throughout the year. It wasn't even post certified at the time. It wasn't. It was just me teaching jujitsu and adapting it to law enforcement. And we would get 20, 30, 40 people would show up to these things, and that was a lot back then. And that's kind of how that grew. And then from there, we got into the state doing some smaller classes with another system that was being taught at the time. That their person that ran that system saw what we were doing, and at first was kind of like, I don't think cops need to fight on the ground. But once they came and trained with us, they saw the validity to it. And then they started allowing us to teach like a ground fighting component in Connecticut. And then that eventually grew into the full course.
That's awesome. Yeah, so, our academy here in Webster, we're a proud affiliate of the Officer Survival Series. Thanks for you reaching out to me. I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and getting us going on that because we have had a few of our students go and do your flagship course. With the flagship course, you call it de-escalation through confidence. So, what inspired you to name it de-escalation through confidence, and did that title kind of help you to give you a direction in how you would eventually teach law enforcement jujitsu?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I was sitting around and I was talking to one of my good friends. Eric Lundell. He's a retired police officer now. He was in the military. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's one of the head instructors with our course for many years. And I was talking with him and I'm explaining to him, I'm like, Officer Survival Series is a good name, but I need more of a tagline to go with it that, will kind of get the point across to administrators and stuff like that as to why this would be a good program for people to do. And I said, I want to get across that, it builds confidence, and the better trained you are, the less likely you're even to use force. And, me being highly trained, and I come across someone that looks like they might want to, cause a problem or start the fight, I might react a lot different to that person based on my confidence level versus someone who doesn't have the same skills might be more apt to be nervous around this person or overreact or underreact. And I was like, how do we put this into words? And he's like, I got it. De-escalation through confidence. So that actually came from Eric Lundell, the actual name of it. And I'm like, that's perfect, because
Yeah.
our whole goal as police officers is not to go out there and get into a fight. Our goal is, but we have to respond to violence. It's in our job description, right? It's part of the job. And I look at it as de-escalation. Oftentimes people think it's verbal only, and it's not. De-escalation can be nonverbal, it can be verbal, it can be physical. A very extreme example would be someone is an active killer going through a mall shooting people, and a police officer comes in with a rifle and shoots that person from 100 yards away down the mall. They de-escalated that situation. They stopped it from getting worse. Right now, that's a very extreme situation, but on the flip side, it could be your mere presence, or the way you carry yourself, or the way you speak or don't speak, or the way you listen to someone, the way you let someone vent, as long as they're not hurting themselves or someone else. And then when it is time to go hands on, you kind of realize that through your confidence of training and the pressure you put yourself under on a daily basis, you're not afraid to swim out over your head because you can. Whereas someone that can't and doesn't have that same training background, they're going to probably panic. They're probably going to make mistakes much faster than someone with training. And they either underreact or overreact versus the right balance. And I think that when you train enough and you have that consistency in training, you develop a pathway to understanding that when you grab onto someone, you kind of know within the first few seconds, yeah, I got this guy, or uh-oh. You just know by that transfer of energy, because you've grappled with so many people, you can just read it.
Yeah, I think that title is amazing, de-escalation through confidence, because every agency administration is gonna love the fact that you're training officers to be better at de-escalation and to be more confident officers on the street. Those 2 words, de-escalation and confidence, is really what makes it and opens up, I think, a lot of administrators' minds into what it is that you're teaching. So, can you give a quick overview? I know there's a lot that you teach in the Officer Survival Series, but can you give a quick overview to our listeners as to what the Officer Survival Series teaches, and, what the levels of certifications are and so forth?
Yeah, so basically, if you know anything about law enforcement, the typical defensive tactics course in most places is going to be a 40-hour course. It's going to be a 5-day course. Now, there are some outliers. There are some places that do 8 days, 9 days, 10 days, or whatever, or break it up in some capacity. But most defensive tactics instructor programs are 5 days, Monday through Friday, 40 hours. And you could be a person that's a black belt jiu-jitsu, or you could be a person that's literally never done any martial arts combative training in your life. And at the end of that 5 days, you're both getting the same piece of paper. It's going to say that you're an instructor on it. Okay. And I always had a pretty huge problem with that, because I just kind of looked at it as, there's no way, no matter how good of an instructor someone could be or how good the material is, there's no way I can take someone in 5 days and make them proficient enough that they can go back and then teach everyone else that under their guard to do the same thing. I think that it just takes time to develop that type of sensitivity to the training and understanding the positions and understanding the answers to different questions that might pop up, and being a competent instructor. So I've always been very against that checkbox, paper tiger type, instructor certification. I don't believe in it. So one of the very first things I did was said, I'm going to put together a course. It's 2 tiers. Tier 1 is 8 days. And then 6 months later, if you wanted to, you could take tier 2, which is another 8 days. So a total of 16 if you did the entire both tiers. And the first tier is what most people end up going through. Obviously, everybody goes through that first. And I wanted to shine a light on various aspects of use of force And the whole idea of the course is that if you come through as, a student, you may be very good at a specific thing, and then you get to another thing and be like, "Oh, I don't know anything about this." A good example would be I've had many, many jiu-jitsu black belts come through. I've had world champions come through, ADCC champions come through, UFC fighters come through, and many of them will tell you, especially the straight jiu-jitsu guys, they'll say, "Man, I'm the student." You say, how you have a person that comes through and they don't do jiu-jitsu and it's clear they don't do jiu-jitsu. I'm the jiu-jitsu guy that can't throw a punch. I'm the jiu-jitsu guy that can't do a takedown. I'm the jiu-jitsu guy that can't use the wall because all I ever do is roll around on the ground from the guard. So they realize pretty quickly they have a missing part of the combative element of jiu-jitsu because they have concentrated on a specific part of jiu-jitsu and they haven't learned the entire thing, right? So that might be a wake-up call to them. To another police officer, it might be tactical medical is a mistake. Like, hey, I don't know enough about tac medical, or I don't know enough about testifying in court. So basically, what we teach in the class is we do 5 ranges of fighting. They learn to strike, they learn to clinch, they learn to take people down, they learn to positions on the ground, they learn weapons-based environment because in any one of these ranges, a tool can be implemented either against you or you may have to deploy one in defense of yourself or someone else. And then we do handcuffing and we do team tactics where you're working with another officer to control a person and get them under control. We do vertical barrier work. We do vehicle extractions. We teach about weapons such as edge weapon response and weapon retention of their handgun. And then from that point, we have a lot of scenario training where they have to, it's one thing to do the movements on a mat where you're just going back and forth and decide, and using a takedown, for example. But it's a whole nother animal when I send you into a call and you have to talk through the situation and figure out what's going on and then apply in the moment the force if it even needs to be applied, because not every scenario we send you in requires force. Some just require talking, some require force. And it's up to you to determine that based on your experience when you go through the scenario. And then that's very different than just slap, bump, and let's roll. Okay. They have to have that decision making process, right? So those scenarios are recorded. We have attorneys watch them and then they have to testify and write reports about their experience. So they literally get in front of a courtroom, mock courtroom type environment, and actual police litigation attorneys will interview them and they show their video and they question them about the force they use, both cross-examination and direct examination. And they then have to explain what they did and why they did it under the color of law, basically. And that's kind of the elements of the class, the first tier. And then they have an entire video database of all the curriculum that they have access to. We have an affiliate system set up, like as you know, you're one of the affiliates. And our big thing is we're not going to teach you in 8 days everything you need to know for the rest of your life. We're here to shine that spotlight on different areas of force. And then when you leave this class, you should be going out and seeking further training in some of these areas. Now, most of the areas they can find right within law enforcement, the grappling portion, I have partnered with martial arts schools like yourself that are trusted, and I funnel them towards those schools that are law enforcement friendly, that teach a well-rounded curriculum where they can develop their grappling skills in that environment, which easily translate to law enforcement if you understand the differences.
Yeah, I can anecdotally, I can say, I went through your course and I was extremely impressed at how comprehensive it was. The force on force scenarios were amazing. The attorney piece, I just was thrown off by that, thinking, wow, it was very enlightening for me to hear an attorney coming in and talking about things too. So it was great. And so with all the officers that you've trained, you've had a very, very big impact on officers' careers in terms of how efficient they are in de-escalation on the street. So what is the kind of feedback that you get? Can you give our listeners a little bit of an understanding as to the perspective of an officer that's on the street now that has taken your course and what they have experienced or what feedback they have given you in terms of how effective the defensive tactics are that you're training them in?
Well, the 8-day tier 1 class that we've been putting on now since before COVID, hundreds of people have gone through it, and we've never had anything less than a 5-star review for it. Never even one time. And we've even had hostages come through the class that didn't want to be there, that were sent by their agency because because one of the issues with our course that people have a hard time with is, like I mentioned earlier, I won't just certify someone, your favorite child from your police department, and they have zero background in this type of thing. that we're going to make them better in 8 days. We're going to show them their weaknesses. We're going to show them their strengths, and we're going to give them the opportunity to get them better, because we give them 6 months of free jujitsu at one of our schools once they come out of this program, that so they can continue their training. And but one of the things that people will be down about is that they aren't automatically going to become an instructor at the end of the 8 days. Because I'm not going to lie to them. I'm going to say, hey, you just don't have the skill base yet, right? So that sometimes can be something to overcome. But once they're there for 2 or 3 days, they realize pretty quickly, it's usually 2 or 3 hours. They're like, I was wrong. Like I literally don't know what I thought I knew. And I'm easily finding that out in this class under some pressure, that I'm not as skilled as I thought I was. And they quickly decide that, we are correct in the way we're doing it. And then we allow them to continue training, and then we will update their certificate to an instructor level once they put the work in, right? Now, if someone comes into the class and they already have a skill base, they wrestled 4 years in college, they have a jiu-jitsu blue belt, purple belt, whatever, and they go to the class, we can tell pretty quickly that they understand. We will promote that person to a instructor level certification. Now, a lot of them, when they come through, whether they were a fan of us or not, at the end, they all are. And when they go back to their job and they start going to calls and they start utilizing the training, or they start showing in their in-service classes, and some officers come back, and the big thing is the body cam footage. We get lots of body cam footage. There's not a week that goes by where I don't get 2 or 3 body cams from various officers from around the state of Connecticut, mostly because that's mostly where we train people from, but even around the country where we've gone. And they'll send us. I was walking into a football game last week in Wethersfield, Connecticut, with my wife, and I'm walking into it's a high school varsity game at night. I'm walking into the game, and all of a sudden a cop comes over, sees me in line, comes over to me. Hey, Rob, we just used the team tactics and arm pry, and here's the video, and he's trying to show me on his phone. And he sent it to me later, and then I'm in the stands at the same game, and my phone goes off, and Glastonbury Police Department just did another technique, and they're sending me the video. So, like, it's a
Wow.
constant thing, where these people are going to the class, they're realizing in the class, wow, this works pretty well because we're resisting each other. Whereas most DT classes, you don't resist each other. And then they go to the street and it starts working for them. They start getting actual data to show that what we're showing them works in a real world environment. And that's the key difference. It's, text messages all the time, phone calls all the time, emails all the time, Instagram messages all the time. Hey, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is amazing. This works. I did this, I did that. And, that's where the real proof is. We could run the greatest class in the world, but if there's nothing that ever comes out of it, then it's a waste of time.
Yeah, how gratifying is that for you to get these messages from people that you've trained on a regular basis? It gives you so much more purpose for what you do, and it's one of the biggest things is in life is to feel appreciated, and getting those that feedback is awesome for you and for your academy too. So you're a busy guy. You have a lot going on. You're a family man. You have 3 children. Your son just got promoted to black belt, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he started
yeah,
training when
that's awesome.
we all did when they were young, and he just got his black.
Yeah, yeah, so you have a lot of balance going on between, family commitments and your academy commitments and the officer survival courses that you're running. That's a lot of juggling for you, and so how do you keep it all together?
Well, my wife Christine is absolutely amazing, and my 3 kids, Alex, Sam, and EJ, they're all part of it with me. They help, they work at the school. My son Sam is tremendous with, like, AI and all the video editing, and, like, he's also trained jiu-jitsu and MMA and stuff like that, so he's really, really good with that. And my son Alex is a very good business person. He's a real estate agent, and he understands. He's very good at working with people and discussing things, and he's a talker, and he's a really good instructor. People love going to his classes, so it's a group effort. We're all in it together, and I've built a cadre of people over the last 26 years. That they're you know we have you know well, I think 30 black belts at our school. So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of them, and they're all, they love it. They love the culture that we have there. They love training. They all have something they bring to the table. So, it's many hands make light work, and that's what it comes down to. Is I'm not doing this by myself. I did start off doing this, my wife and I, and that was it. But then, over the years, I met really good people. Those really good people helped propel us forward. Without them, I wouldn't be where I am, that's for sure. And the same thing with OSS. It was the same process with OSS. It was just cops versus civilians, right? And there's people that overlie both. I have certain people that help me with both programs. I was super fortunate, got a lot of help, and I wouldn't. To me, it's not even work. I mean, it was a few weeks ago, probably about 3 weeks ago, I did 90 hours working basically, but it didn't feel like I was working because I'm doing something I love. And
Right,
I mean,
right.
when I spend 12 hours on a mat, you know, 15 hours, that was 2 days in a row with Craig Douglas, 15, 16-hour days. And it didn't really feel like work because I
Yeah.
love every minute of it. So
Yeah, you live in your passion, and all that sacrifice that you put in over the years is finally paid off to the point where now, you're in your 50s now and you can't physically do as much as you were able to do before. And now you've got like you said, a whole cadre of people that are there to help you continue growing your school and continue moving forward with everything. So that's great. It's a great story. I appreciate your time, Rob. I know I would love to be able to talk to you longer, but we got a lot of valuable insight in here for our listeners. And, our podcast is about connecting jujitsu with careers. And you're a culmination of those things. So
I
we
appreciate.
appreciate you coming on. We appreciate your time. Do you have any last minute, advice that you can give to anybody that's in jujitsu or law enforcement?
I mean, I think that in jiu-jitsu, the advice is show up and train, and and train consistently, and train with good people, and you're going to be fine. Don't worry so much about losing. Don't worry so much about getting tapped out. Just show up and get better. Like that's it. It's the consistency over time that's going to get you better. There's no secret. That is the secret, right? It's not owning 10 instructional videos. It's not going to 16 seminars in a month. It's showing up on the mat day to day to day, even the days you don't want to, and showing up and putting the work in. And it's one of the last things left on earth that if you do it right, it still requires hard work and to get there. But I think that's that with you got to have something of interest outside of the job. You cannot make your whole life the job, because no matter how good of a cop you think you are, no matter how much you think you're handling it, no matter how much you love it, at the end of the day, the job is going to win. Okay. No one gets out of this job winning, but the job wins. And what I mean by that is the job is going to take its toll on you. You're going to see and hear things that no human being should ever have to experience. It's going to accumulate over many years of time, even in a small you're going to have many things that occur to you over your career that you may not think bother you in the moment, but long term they are adding up. And you have to find an outlet. You have to find something that gets you away from that, whether it's fishing or mountain biking. Or for me, it was jujitsu, and I think jujitsu probably is a really good choice because not only does it translate to your job and there's similar minded people there, but it also lets you know that there's good people in the world that support law enforcement that aren't necessarily law enforcement, but they're in the jiu-jitsu school and everybody gets along in there. And you can see that when you're training, you can't think of your problems the same. Now your problems will still be there when you leave, but you're much better off to deal with them when you do leave because you've spent that time on the mat and kind of cleaning your mind a little bit. And I think that there's not a lot of other activities in the world that do that like jiu-jitsu does. So I think that would be important. And then finally, when you blend the two worlds together, for me, I think there's a Japanese saying called like ikigai, I want to say it's called. And I know
Yeah, yep.
a little bit, but basically the Western civilization is kind of like done a little bit different with it. But I think the gist is if you find something that you love and something that you're good at and something that the world needs, and you can make that your job, you have basically found your purpose in life, right? So that's kind of what I feel like we did here is I took something I love that I'm good at, that the world needs, and we made it our job. So that's where I'm at.
That's awesome. So fulfilling for you, for your academy, and all the people around you. So thank you so much for your time, Rob. I appreciate you being on our show today. And yeah, so just let's keep in touch. I'm going to send some more people to your course. The more that we can get people trained and loving jujitsu, the better off we all are, right?
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
great day.
You too.
See you,
Bye.
buddy.
Well, there you have it. As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to reflect on the powerful connections we've explored between the art of jiu-jitsu and your career. In your workplace and in jiu-jitsu, you learn to adapt and navigate challenges. So remember that persistence and the courage to embrace the lessons that you learn are the keys to your growth both on the mat and in your career.